السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفر ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد، أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والليل إذا سجى. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والشمس وضحاها والقمر إذا تلاها. I want to, inshallah, begin this topic that, inshallah, I'm going to speak about with the mentioning of the beginning of two verses in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to celestial objects and great creation of His that have not been matched by any human being, any being in the universe. And I know the topic of today was the miracle of the Quran. Why is the Quran so miraculous? You know, subhanAllah, you can go to any different faith and you can ask them, what is it about your faith that makes your faith accurate? Why do you believe in what it is that you believe? If you were to go to a Jew, they would most likely say, well, we believe that our teachings are ancient teachings that have great importance. There is a lot of historic value, and Moses, David, Solomon are our forefathers of whom we learn from. If you were to go to a Christian would say, we believe in what we believe because we believe that Jesus died for our sins. And because of that, we have an affinity for God, who in some respect they believe is Jesus, a'udhu billah, but they have this notion. But if you were to ask a Muslim, and you were to say, someone were to ask you, why is it that you believe in Islam? What is it about Islam that really drives it home? Well, you can say, of course, that I believe in Tawheed. I believe in the oneness of God. Well, to a Christian, they may say that we believe in Tawheed too, right? And you can go on and on and on and back and forth about what does it mean to believe in the oneness of God, but they'll, try to dispel your theory, thank you, by using the 1 in 3 and the 3 in 1 example. And then you can talk about maybe the 5 pillars of Islam and what it means to be righteous, that we give zakat, that we pray. Well, to a Christian, they give zakat. To a Jew, to some degree, they give zakat. What is it about Islam that makes it so right? What gives integrity to this religion that we believe? And to be honest, there's only one answer. And that answer is the Quran. The reason why that is because the Quran holds a certain power, a certain aura that cannot be matched by any book on the face of this globe. There are many miracles in the Quran that have not been matched by any book of literature, especially that from a deity on the face of this globe. If you look into the Quran, there are multiple manifestations of that miracle. What does it mean? What is a miracle? by the way. I'll open it up to the audience, inshallah. What is a miracle? Impossible by the human being. Okay, what else? Huh? Surprise? Okay. So, yeah? Yes, okay, that's very good, yes. A loose definition is something that cannot be achieved through a normal process. So if you were to look at, for example, the people of Jesus, you know, the Jews at the time, one of their ultimate skills was they knew how to cure those who had disease, okay? And so obviously, as we know, when Isa alayhi salam came to these people, he had the power to cure a leper to such an extent that even the doctors within those times questioned how it was done. You see, the power of Allah is noticeable to those who are Muslim and to those who are not Muslim. The same reasons why when the Quraysh were met with the verses of the Quran, their hearts were moved, even though they were too arrogant to state it with their tongue. But they knew inside that this was the work of something greater. So Isa alayhi salam, he had this ability. Musa alayhi salam obviously was gifted through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the ability to change objects, right? So magic. In those days, that was something that was revered and they were good at it. But Musa alayhi salam taught them. Well, when we look at the Quran, during the time of the Quraysh, what was the most apparent societal, topic going on? It was poetry. If you were a poet, that meant you were well respected within society. I mean, you were somebody that had skill, very much similar to Pakistani families, for example, right? If you're a doctor, okay? You're revered, right? SubhanAllah. And many Arab families as well, right? If you hold a high status in society, you are somebody that's revered. Like when people come to you, they don't call you by your name. What do they call you by? Dr. Saab, right? They add a title because that gives you some type of, credential. And in the time of the Quraysh, the Arabs at the time, they held these poets to great esteem. And obviously when the Quran came down, it shattered this notion that poetry, eloquent poetry, can only be constructed through a human being's effort. In reality, that wasn't the case. When the Quran came down, it literally destroyed any type of poetry that was created by any of the well-known poets of the Quraysh. For example, a verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. Indeed, exalted is your Lord. And if we look at this verse, it is a palindrome. And what is a palindrome? It's a word that's spelled front and back, it's the same. Okay, so mom, M-O-M, if you spell it frontwards, it's the same as if you were to spell it backwards. Dad, race car, these words. This entire sentence, if you were to spell it from the beginning to the end, it would be symmetric as though you were to spell it from the end to the beginning. So if I ask my brother Nuh, for example, I said, Brother Nuh, I want you to write an essay on filmmaking, subhanAllah, right? And when you write that essay, not only do I want to know the history, I want to know how you film, I want to know all that, it has to have good content, but along with that, it needs to read the same front as it does back, right? How hard would it be to mimic that? Be impossible, right? So if we have just agreed that this feat that I have challenged our brother Nuh, mashallah, is a great brother, smart brother, but I don't think anybody in the room could do that. If we agree that that is not achieved through human intervention, then we have to attest to the fact that whoever constructed the Quran must have acted without the realm of understanding as we know it. They must have had a power, a miracle, so to speak, that we do not have. And it has just been proven through this dialogue between me and my brother Nuh, right? Other miracles in the Quran are endless. I mean, there's scientific miracles that give Quran integrity. For example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the difference in the salinity of the bodies of ocean between, not explicitly stated, but it is assumed, between the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. There is a difference in salinity, or the content of salt in the water, that creates a color differentiation between the two bodies of water. And there's an intersection between them where the two bodies of water, they do not cross. And in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, مَرَجَ الْبَحْرَيْنِ يَلْتَقِيَانِ بَيْنَهُمَا بَرْزَقٌ لَا يَبَغِيَانِ, where he states that we have let loose two bodies of water, and we have created in between them a barrier in which they do not transgress. Okay? Now think about it. Somebody who was illiterate, who lived 1400 years ago in the middle of a desert, who had really not been exposed to large bodies of water, could they have innovated this type of understanding? Of course not. Surely this must have come from a higher being in order for them to understand this. The water cycle is noted in the Quran. Coral reefs, the creation of coral reefs are noted in the Quran, where scientists have barely understood this in the past 20, 30 years. So if you were to bring forth these, criteria towards somebody who really wanted to question the integrity of Islam, what it is that makes you a Muslim, if you were to take away everything, take away, your 5 pillars, take away your zakat, take away your pilgrimage, take away everything, what is it that makes you a Muslim? And you will say that the Quran holds a power that draws me to this religion. SubhanAllah. It holds a power that draws me to this religion. But we're not going to talk about scientific miracles. We're not going to talk about, linguistic miracles. I want to talk about some motifs from one particular story in the Quran that serves as a guide, a spiritual guide. So the Quran as we know it is not a history book. For example, if I were to ask yes. Sorry, what did you say? Oh, sorry. I thought you were raising your hand. It's okay, brother. You can ask questions, inshallah. Quran is not a spiritual guide. If I were to ask you, who was the Fir'aun during the time of Musa alayhi salam, I would get 50 different responses because we don't know his name. Was it Ramses? Was it this guy? Was it that? We don't know. Do we need to know? No. Why? Because the lessons that are to be gained from the story are more valuable than the technical little details that people fixate upon. SubhanAllah. You see this a lot in Pakistani culture. And I'm only going to speak for my culture because I'm Pakistani. Right? I'm not going to speak for another culture. You can agree with me if you want to. But sometimes people make a huge mention. SubhanAllah, they see an artifact like the slipper of the Prophet SubhanAllah, man. Let's go and let's just stare at the slipper for 20 hours and forget our salah. That's what happens, But the Quran is not a history book. It's not a science book. It is a spiritual guide for every human being to exist from the time of the Prophet ﷺ all the way to the Day of Judgment. Even the Prophet ﷺ himself. See, a lot of people, they don't understand this. That the Prophet ﷺ, even though he was a prophet and he was close to as perfect as any human will ever be, he too needed guidance. Which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, He says on many occasions, هَلْ أَتَاكَ حَدِيثُ مُوسَى? For example, has the news of Musa come to you? Has it reached you? Have you heard of this news? Because he's using the predecessors as a means of role models for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One particular role model is Dawood alayhi salam. Dawood alayhi salam in those days was, and by the way, this was somebody who was revered by the Jews as well. Yet, even, subhanAllah, even their own figures that they hold in high esteem, they seem to cast shadows on those figures as well. Whereas in Islam, we do not do that. We hold all our prophets on an honorable level. In Dawood's story, Dawood alayhi salam was a great ruler. He was someone who was articulate, very knowledgeable, and he had a great connection with nature. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنِّي سَخَّرْنَا الْجِبَالَ مَعَهُ يُسَبْنَا بِالْعَصْحِ وَالْإِشْرَاقِ. Indeed, we subjected the mountains to praise with him, praising Allah in the late afternoon and after sunrise. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Dawood alayhi salam and how when he would pray Fajr, there would be like 10 birds lined up with him praying Fajr at the same time. Creation of Allah would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala right with Dawood alayhi salam. He had such a strong connection with nature. And he had a powerful kingdom. And he had eloquent speech. وَفَصْلَ الْخِتَابِ. We gave him discernment in speech. He was among the best in the way he used to talk. And there was a time where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to communicate the value of justice, what it means to be just to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so he says, وَهَلْ أَتَاكَ نَبَاءُ الْخَصْمِ إِن تَسَوُّ الْمِحْرَابِ. Has the story of the arguing factions reached you? The ones who climbed over the wall and went into the mihrab. So what is this? Tasawwaru, what is that? It's derived from a root word which means a tall wall. And so in those days, Dawood alayhi salam, he used to, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his own little mihrab. It was kind of like a shrine. And he would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the walls, subhanAllah, they were so tall that if anybody were to cross over those walls, it seemed as though it was a form of attack. And so Dawood alayhi salam, as soon as these two individuals, they climbed up a wall, he was alarmed. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِذْ دَخَلُوا عَلَى دَاوُودَ فَفَعْزِيَ مِنْهُمْ. When they entered upon Dawood and he was alarmed by them, they said, "Fear not, we are two adversaries, one of whom has wronged the other, so judge between us with truth and do not exceed it." So these two men, they're coming to Dawood alayhi salam, and one of them says that indeed this my brother has 99 sheep and I have one. So he said, "Entrust it to me, for I will take care of this sheep." So one brother has 99 sheep, the other brother has one sheep. And they say, "Dawood, when you judge us, make sure you don't jump to conclusions." But how can that be possible? Because Dawood alayhi salam now is in his mihrab, and these two people climbed over a fence that no human being can climb over, and now he is alarmed. And this in itself is a spiritual guide for us in the matter of judging. Because sometimes, subhanAllah, when somebody comes to us, usually they'll tell us a version of the story. If we're an intermediator between two parties, they'll tell us a version of the story, but how often do we take in that version and wait until we hear the other side of the story before we make a conclusion? And so, in this part of the story of Dawood alayhi salam, that is exactly what happened. Moreover, the man who only had one sheep, he is a little wary, because he knows that Dawood alayhi salam is a very kind ruler, or the man who had 99 sheep thought that Dawud alayhi salam, because he's such a kind ruler, he will look at the sheep and the story, and he will say, you have to give the sheep to the man with the one sheep. He will take the side of the poor man. How is this a lesson for us? Because sometimes, subhanAllah, we automatically think, and this is not a blanket that we can just put over things, but sometimes we automatically think that if somebody seems to be poor and the other one seems to be rich, they automatically are taking advantage of the poor person. This is not necessarily true. Although in many cases in history, the ones who are oppressed are usually the ones who are poor. But in this instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, it doesn't matter who has what, focus on the situation itself. SubhanAllah, you know, funny thing, obviously in America, we've been dealt with the whole situation of civil rights, right? And how the black community have been disenfranchised due to the color of their skin, and they've been judged accordingly. And subhanAllah, we have a very dark history when it comes to this, as America has a very troublesome history when it comes to race relations. That's something that nobody can ignore. And it still holds true in many parts of the country, even till today. The funny thing is that many people associate racism as, you know, the light-skinned individual harming the dark-skinned individual. Well, my mother, she was a refugee from the country of Uganda. And that was back in the 70s. And in the 70s, there was a ruler named Idi Amin who was a dictator in Uganda. And his whole mission was to cleanse East Africa of South Asians, of anybody who was not black. And the community, the South Asians, the Indians, the Pakistanis, the Bengalis, they had a huge role to play when it came to economics within that region. A lot of these people were great assets to the economy, but Idi Amin believed that they were detrimental to the overall economy of Uganda, so he gave them 90 days to leave the country. And I recall, you know, my mother telling me how she used to hear on loudspeakers the army, the Ugandan army, telling all the people who were not African that they needed to leave within 90 days, take all their stuff, or else they would be physically expelled out of the country. And this was like a car just going around the street, you know, and with a loudspeaker just calling out what the punishment was going to be. And subhanAllah, my mom and her family had 90 days to leave, and they left, alhamdulillah, but after that, they were scattered all over the world. SubhanAllah, some ended in England, some ended in Sweden, some ended in America, wherever the Red Cross or sponsorship groups would take them. Now, this tells us a very important example, that racism, it has no color. Racism is a function of prejudice, which has no color. And many a time, you know, even though in this country, obviously, those who have been oppressed have been those of color, those of a lower financial status, those who have been taken advantage of by the 1% of the overall population. This is a fact. But in this story, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making a mention that don't put a blanket statement over a situation due to your preconceived notions. Focus on the situation itself. Make sure you're open-minded. Make sure you listen to both sides of the story before you issue any verdict to whatever that story is. Another lesson to be gained from this story is that when, you know, you have a large amount of wealth, a lot of companies, subhanAllah, smaller companies, family-owned businesses are taken over by corporations, monopolies, and they cease to exist, right? Just because one branch, one, you know, company that's humongous has such influence on the market, they usually swallow the entire market. In this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that the one who has 99 sheep, he wants that one sheep so that he can be the overpowering market of sheep herders within that vicinity. And so through this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, do not believe in monopolies. And this is something where Umar bin Khattab, later on when he became a Khalifa, he actually abolished all monopolies in the Islamic State because he believed that this was a form of persecution. And what happened was Dawood alayhi salam, he actually took the side of the man who had one sheep. And as soon as he did that, both of these men, they disappeared. They disappeared. And Dawood alayhi salam immediately realized that this was actually a test. And upon that, he made sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness in making a rash judgment. So many times in life, we are what our choices, they define us. Our decisions, they define us. Sometimes we make poor choices. Sometimes we make choices that cost the rest of our lives. Sometimes it would benefit us to think logically, rationally, before entering into something that could put us in detriment for the rest of our lives, that we will regret for the rest of our lives. And so one of the lessons in this story, another lesson, is do not be rash in your action. Because what's going to hurt you by taking a minute or two extra to think about what the step forward is. And this is a lesson for all of us in our lives. And in the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O David, O Dawood, we have made you a successor upon the earth, so judge between people in truth, and do not follow your desire, as it will lead you away from Allah. Indeed, those who have gone astray from the way of Allah will have severe punishment for forgetting Judgment Day. SubhanAllah, look at the order in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to reveal His verses. The last verse of that particular story in Surah Sa'd, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that remember, judge accordingly, because if you do not, you will have to answer to the one who judges all. Remember that I am the judge at the end of the day. I see all. That which you think I do not see, I see it. And you will have to answer to me if you do not judge among your fellow human beings with righteousness and piety. And so this was a lesson of being a leader. Sometimes being a leader, you have to make the right choice, even though it's not the easiest choice. Sometimes it could be a hard choice. SubhanAllah, I actually heard this in a movie one time, right? And Tasneem, you may know what I'm talking about. Where, you have two choices in life, right? And one of them is an easy choice. And one of them is a hard choice. The easy choice may lead you to a short-term accomplishment, a short-term fulfillment of a desire. But the long way, although it may be the harder way, it requires more effort and more perseverance, but it will get you to an accomplishment that will sustain you eternally, right? So in this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that remember at the end of the days, who do you answer to? You answer to Allah. And with that, inshallah, that concludes what I wanted to talk about. But if there's any questions that any of you had, I'm more than welcome to answer, inshallah. So. Yeah, so he had the eloquence of speech, right? So he knew how to communicate. And that was one of the reasons why he was such a great judge, right? If I would assume that, if he had a position today, he'd be a great negotiator, a great politician. Not a lying politician that actually wants to help people, right? Somebody who can see both sides and help both sides come to a conclusion. SubhanAllah, did the government reopen today, right? It's Friday, right? SubhanAllah. We need more people like Dawud alayhi salam in the government, right? To help us reach an understanding where both parties agree. But at the end of the day, you'll remember that whatever political faction that you may see in the world, no form of authority will be 100% correct unless it is the authority of Allah. This is a common fact. Regardless if you want to disagree or agree, this is a common fact. That the authority of Allah is the supreme authority over the land, right? And we may take from other, political parties that which we will, that which correlates with what we believe, but at the end of the day, the Quran and the Sunnah, they legislate who we are as human beings and how we conduct ourselves in our lives. And I would guarantee you that if people understood that every time they make an action, especially in government, they have to answer to a higher being, I guarantee you that many of those actions, more of those actions would be better for the entire humanity as opposed to for their own personal desire, right? So, but yeah, sorry, that was a long answer to your question, but any other question? Feel free. It doesn't have to be about Dawud alayhi salam. It could be about anything. No? Yes, Tasneem. Yeah, I mean, so like, a lot of times we're so busy, Assalamu alaikum, with our day-to-day activities. We have work, we've got school. You come home at 7 p.m. and you just want to, literally all you want to do is just eat and sleep. That's literally, I mean, come on, would you disagree with me? That's what you want to do, right? You see a hot plate of biryani in front of you, some nice orange juice or whatever you're into, right? And then a bed right there, that's it, right? But subhanAllah, I was told in life, right, that, there are people who are here and then there's people who are here, right? If you want to be among that small population that is motivated and is determined to achieve the best, then you have to put in a little extra, right? And so that is true across the board. When it comes to the Quran, I would guarantee you that one of the main dilemmas in our Muslim ummah is that we just don't read the Quran. We just don't, right? It's sitting in our bookshelf collecting dust, we don't read it. And one of the main remedies to that is to allocate times throughout the day that may not necessarily be times of high volume thinking that we can use to pursue the Quran, such as when we're driving, right? Play an audio cassette of whatever your favorite surah is. There are many recordings that have the ayah, and then after the ayah, they have the English translation as well. The seerah of the Prophet ﷺ also gives a great insight into the Quran, because obviously the Quran was revealed at different points during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And it wasn't in chronological order as we see it today. This was reassembled during the Khulafa's time. But before that, the Quran, it came down in different arrangement than how we see it today. So that would be a couple tips, but for sure, make use of the time that may be not, it wouldn't involve that much high volume thinking, such as driving, running, going to the gym, things like that. So, any other questions? All right, inshallah, with that, yeah. 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 So, there's a hadith where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet states that if you were to cover the sin of your fellow brother, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cover your sins on the day of judgment, right? And making public that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kept hidden is actually a sin in itself. So for those of us who may have committed a sin that nobody else knows about, don't publicize that sin, because that in effect is a damage to yourself. That's number one. Number two, more specifically to what you're asking is, how can we not judge other people who blatantly act in contradiction to our faith? And it hurts a little more when there are Muslims, right? As opposed to people who don't know about Islam. Well, it's a very simple answer, right? The most you can do is offer nasiha, right? And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide them. And when you offer nasiha, there's actually a manner in which somebody is to offer advice to another fellow Muslim brother and sister. A lot of times you come into the masjid, and I heard a story of a guy who, you know, he was praying. There was like a row of people in the first line at a masjid for like also prayer. And one of the people, their phone goes off. And subhanAllah, and he answers it, and then like he says, hello, I'll call you back later. He puts it back and he continues praying. And then after the salah, the people, they all get mad at this brother, and they're like, man, why did you do this? You know, none of our prayers were accepted because you answered your phone, and we have to pray again, and why did you do this, subhanAllah? You know, that brother who narrated this, who was just witnessing this, he went back to that masjid like a few days later, and the sheikh of the masjid, he told him that, you know, this man who answered the phone, he had just taken his shahada, the prayer before this prayer. So it was also, he had taken his shahada at dhuhr. He had just become a Muslim, and subhanAllah, for 2 years after that, he never came to that masjid, right? So think about what you're going to do before you do it. Right? Don't make an assumption that this somebody is on the same level of knowledge as you. Not everybody is at the same level of knowledge as Deen. This is something within our own Muslim community that we have to understand. But when we give nasiha, let's say my fellow brother did something that was outrightly wrong. I take him to the side. You make it private. You do not expose it publicly. Take them to the side, consult them, and number one, you know, tell them, admire them, give them some sense of, you know, feeling good about themselves. And then you move on with advice, right? It can be critique, but in a constructive way that is not mean, right? You offer them advice, you say, you're my brother or sister in Islam, I think it's better if you do such and such, and make amends, whatever. And you leave it at that. And if they keep repeating that, then it's not up to you, right? You've done your part, you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide them, and that's pretty much all that you can do. But that's a very good question. Anything else? All right. With that, inshallah, I think there's food downstairs, right? Okay. Is there food downstairs? Yeah? Okay. Inshallah, food's ready. I'll end. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wa salamun ala al-mursaleen. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين. جزاك الله خير. And inshallah, on to the dinner.